Have you been struggling to master those challenging panning shots? In this video, I'll tell you exactly what settings and techniques to use in order to succeed. The video you're about to watch is actually one of 38 lectures in my best-selling online course called Wildlife Photography for Beginners and Amateurs that not only covers creative techniques like panning, but also equipment, settings, light, composition, and animal behavior. So click on the link in the video description if you'd like to learn more and enroll. In this lecture, I'm going to be talking about panning shots. And that's essentially photographs where your background is streaky and your subject or the animal itself is partially in focus and partially out of focus. Now, panning shots are taken at very slow shutter speeds, usually slower than a 50th of a second. So with all that light coming in, there's often a big chance of overexposing the photograph if you take it at the wrong time of the day. And for that reason, I typically take panning shots very early in the morning, late in the afternoon, or on overcast days. So for instance, if I'm on the Chobe River photographing African skimmers flying past me, I would go for these kind of frozen shots at fast shutter speeds when it's nice and sunny, and as soon as my shutter speed drops late in the afternoon because there's less light, I'll go for panning shots like this one instead. So how do we actually take panning shots? Well, first of all, and very importantly, you've got to move the same speed as the animal. In other words, you've got to follow it through the viewfinder of your camera. And then secondly, you've got to take the photograph while you're moving. You can't do this. Or some people even go. That certainly won't give you the panning result. You've got to do it in one fluent movement like this. Okay, let's talk settings. When I take panning shots, I switch over to shutter priority and auto ISO, so that ISO value can drop nice and low, maybe even as low as 100 if it's relatively bright conditions. Remember, at those slow shutter speeds, we want to make sure that the photographs don't overexpose. Now, the actual shutter speed value that you choose very much depends on how fast the animal is moving. If it's an animal walking very slowly past you, like this leopard, you could photograph it at about a 1/5 of a second. If that animal starts moving a little bit faster, like a trotting wild dog, up that shutter speed a little bit, around about a 1/10 to a 15th of a second. And the moment that the animal runs very fast, go for something between a 30th and a 50th of a second. This skimmer photograph that I showed you earlier was photographed at a 30th of a second. The fact of the matter is, it's very much trial and error, and you'll have to play around with it a lot until you learn what works best for certain situations. And take as many of them as you can, with the hope that one or two of them are going to work. Believe me, even for me as a professional, I'll take hundreds of panning shots before I get one that I really like. And remember to keep that animal in focus as it moves past you. Remember to be in focus tracking, so AI servo for Canon or AFC for Nikon, and instead of using a single focus point in the middle, use a small cluster, and that way there's more chance of getting good focus on it as you track the animal. So to summarize quickly, we take panning shots in low light conditions, in shutter priority or to ISO, and we make sure that we are in AFC or AI servo where we can track the animal, and also where we use a small cluster as opposed to a single focus point. And the shutter speed value that we choose kind of varies between a 1/5 and a 50th of a second, depending on how fast or slow the animal is moving. Slower shutter speeds for animals that are walking, and faster shutter speeds for birds in flight or animals that are running. Remember that panning shots can also be done vertically, like this leopard jumping out of a tree, and it can also be of any kind of action, not necessarily an animal just walking or running past you, like these two springbok who are busy fighting and moving fast from side to side. Now, while we're talking about creative slow shutter shots, there's another kind of shot that you can try as well. And that's basically where you keep the camera dead still on a tripod or a beanbag and capture some kind of movement in the photograph. Now, there's this wonderful place down in the Kruger National Park close to Lower Sabi Rest Camp where you can park on a high water bridge and look down on the Sabi River where there are some rapids below. And there's usually some kind of creatures down enjoying the water below. Now, I found this hippo one day just chilling in the shallows, and as you can see, he kept very still, but the water was moving past him very fast. So by taking this photograph with my camera nice and still on a beanbag at a 20th of a second, I was able to get this photograph where the hippo is still, but the water kind of streaks past it. I did something very similar for this hammerkop fishing in the same part of the rapids. and by photographing it at 1/10 of a second, I was able to get some nice streaks in the water as well. And the only reason that I was able to freeze the hummerkop at 1/10 of a second was because it was standing dead still. And it obviously did that because it was very focused on the fishing. Another nice opportunity to do something like this is when you find vultures on a carcass, because there's often a lot of movement around. If you find them on a very sunny day like this, obviously you'll go for a photograph that you can freeze the action at a nice fast shutter speed. In this case, it was a 3,200th of a second. If, however, you find that carcass early in the morning, late in the afternoon, or on overcast conditions, and you can't get those super fast shutter speeds, why not again put your camera on a beanbag where it's dead still and then take a photograph at a slow shutter speed. In this case, it was 1/10 of a second, and capture all that squabbling of the vultures on the carcass. What I love so much about this, at 1/10 of a second, I was able to freeze the ones that were sitting still and capture the movement in the ones that were moving. And for me, this almost captures this whole squabbling and interaction around the carcass better than the one where you freeze the action at a fast shutter speed. Don't always try to freeze the action with fast shutter speeds, and be brave enough to take some panning shots or creative slow shutter shots where you follow the animal or keep your camera dead still to capture some kind of movement in the scene with slow shutter speeds. And remember that with these kind of situations, it's usually trial and error. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to check out that link at the top of the video description if you'd like to enroll in my online course called Wildlife Photography for Beginners and Amateurs. Also take a moment to like, subscribe, and comment.